All right, I think we'll get started. And all right, good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Zreich, Superintendent of Schools. I know we don't have a huge audience, but maybe people come in and out. Si alguien necesita interpretación, tenemos interpretación en español y pueden apretar la foto del mundo en su escena de Zoom para tener interpretación en español. Okay, so I'm here joined by our Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Employee Engagement, Mary Delay, and Chelsea Banks, our Chief of Opportunity and Response, joining us for this meeting. And we also have our Spanish interpreter, Alex Fordich is with us, and then Jensen Frost is our school committee secretary who's helping us organize this Zoom tonight. So our plan tonight is to just present some information to you regarding the FY22 budget. And then FY23, I'm sorry, we're in FY22 now. FY23, we're going to share some information about how we have gone about thinking about formulating our budget plan. And then we want to give you some context about what's happening and how the funding has been allocated to us, both at the local and the state level. And then we're going to open it up for questions via the Q&A. And then we will have an opportunity for people to give feedback. Unfortunately, it will be just through the Q&A comments that people can give feedback. So we'll get started. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. All right, so this is our second forum of today. We had one with staff earlier today, and we have another one in person next Tuesday evening at Saltonstall School for those people who would prefer to have an in-person experience around this presentation. So again, we're going to review the district strategy, talk a little bit about budget context, talk about budget priorities, and then we have 3 questions we want folks to be thinking about. And it would be great if people could be thinking about it throughout the presentation. What should we continue doing or expand doing? What should we stop doing? And is there anything that is missing or has been overlooked relative to some of the ideas that we present tonight? At the core of our work is our equity statement. This is the statement that was jointly developed with the school committee, and we had input from many different stakeholders last school year. And at the grounding, any decision we make has to be about how we identify and disrupt inequities in our system and improve outcomes and experiences for every student, not just some, but all. And so that's at the core of what we do is this statement around equity. And I hope that our budget planning has sufficiently taken this into consideration. I ask that the school committee think similarly when they are making decisions about what to approve and not to approve relative to our budget. And I'm also hopeful that our city council takes that into consideration as they make decisions. But that as a community, we have put a stake in the ground that this is critical and important. And this statement can be found in every school office across our district. Part of being an equitable organization is how we think about our investments. And I think we have done a lot of stuff as a system. Sometimes we do too much stuff, and that does there's initiative overload. And we've got to think strategically about what we're investing in, because at the end of the day, it has to be connected to true outcomes for kids. It has to be connected to seeing that we're moving the needle for children around different key metrics, both academic and non-academic. I think a lot of people see outcomes and they think about MCAS immediately. I think we have a much broader definition of that involves how we're supporting the growth and development of students social emotionally. Are students coming to school? Are they having access to advanced coursework? Are students having access to early college, internships? There's a plethora of ways to define success. I think the pandemic has also taught us that how we've traditionally thought about success and accountability has to be more than just one test score. MCAS is important, but it's one piece of, I think, defining what a successful or a strong school is, and a student that is being successful or progressing in the right direction. It's just one data point. But at the end of the day, when we make investments, we need to know that they're resulting in outcomes for the young people that we serve. We established 4 priorities as a system at the end of the last school year, as we talked about the evolution of our strategic plan that had been developed in 2017. And so this was our 2.0 version that was going to that lasts for this year and next school year. And just simply put, we're committed to putting the best teachers and leaders in front of our kids. And by teachers, I mean all educators. I consider anybody that works in our schools as educators, paraprofessionals, our food service staff, our clerks, our custodians. They all have a role in supporting the growth and development of our students. And we want the best in front of our kids, the best talent, diverse talent, well-trained, and mission-aligned people working in front of our children. Number 2 is our core work as a school system. We're an academic institution. We want excellence for all. From the moment they enter us, which is increasingly growing, the number of pre-K students has grown. I think it's doubled over the last 2 years. So when they first come to us at 3 or 4, sometimes 5, all the way to post-secondary. And we have early college options. We have dual enrollment options. We're looking at a 5th year of high school options. And so, the continuum has to be strong throughout in order for our students to excel from the moment they join us to the moment they walk across the stage and leave us and walk into the world, hopefully prepared for, having options in college or higher ed, and having options in the workforce as well. Number 3 has obviously elevated significantly through the pandemic. We have a commitment and a need to ensure that we're meeting the social, emotional well-being of our students and their families. The pandemic has obviously exposed a lot of the trauma for young people, the impact of being secluded and being away from their peers, and the lack of engagement that students suffered during the pandemic has obviously had a huge impact on our children as they return to school. I think more than any of us ever expected, and we've had to pivot a lot to support our young people and their families, many of whom are struggling with employment, who are struggling with securing mental health supports. There are long lines and challenges in getting those supports for young people and their families who experience trauma. That includes our staff. Everyone has been obviously profoundly affected by the events of the last few years. And so no time more than now to make sure those systems of support exist in our schools. The 4th one is really about the efficiency and the modernization of our systems. We've got to have strong, efficient systems that are using taxpayer dollars well, that are ensuring that the backbone of the organization runs smoothly and doesn't get in the way of providing our young people with the best experience that we can. And we've got a lot of work to do. We're still stuck in many cases in the 20th century with some of our systems. Both our facilities, our different departments, how we onboard people, and some of our fiscal systems. And while we've made a lot of progress, we have a long way to go as an organization still. This breaks down each of those 4 priorities in a little bit more detail. And I'm not going to read them to you, but there's a series of 12 different initiatives related to the priorities that I just mentioned. Best teachers and leaders, academic excellence, support systems for social emotional learning for students and families, and strategic and accountable systems. And you can see the different buckets of work that we have set out to accomplish over the course of the next 2 years. And you can see what those are on the screen. It's an ambitious, so I would argue maybe at times overly ambitious of what we're trying to accomplish. But I do think it builds off of the strategic plan that had existed. And I think also takes into account this moment in time that we're in, where schooling is faced with unprecedented challenges. I think these are some of the important initiatives. We heard that a lot, or I heard this a lot as part of my entry planning as a new superintendent. And then as we held forums around the use of ESSER, when we did budget forums last year. These are themes that emerged that helped us form these priorities. We talked about outcomes earlier. And so we're going to look at our success around these priorities and initiatives with a series of outcomes. And again, I know that the type is pretty small, but we have a whole series of metrics that is our North Star. We're hoping to move the needle in a positive direction around all kinds of outcomes. The number of pre-K seats we have, the diversity of our educational staff, our workforce, chronic absentee numbers, which I don't think we're going to be anywhere close to some of that data after an unanticipated year of variants and surges this year. And then, we're looking at how many people are we retaining to come to our schools, students. We want to look at MCAS is one data point here, growth in particular. And then we're looking at, improving dropout and graduation rates and advanced workforce access. And this is the package that we think will determine whether as a system we're making we're making gains or not, and we plan to be reporting out on this over this summer. So this is some of our core work and how we would define success as a school system. So this process of improvement has to be connected very closely to the budget process. And it is really in a perfect world, and I don't think most systems do this well. It's something we're trying to get better at. We're not perfect, but your process of improvement in allocating resources is a year-long process. It doesn't really stop or end. It's just an iterative process of continual growth and improvement. And how you think about resources and budgeting has to be a part of those conversations. So we started back in the summer with setting some district priorities and metrics as at the district level and also at the school level. We help schools align their plans to these district priorities that I just shared, and then set out action plans that were recursive and that schools had to come back and make edits and revisions based on their progress or lack of progress. That's pretty unique because a lot of times we write plans, and school districts and schools write plans that just sit on a shelf. You just put it away. You pray that you make the gains that you set out to, and then you come back at the end of the year to write your plan for the next year. And there's no progress monitoring of any kind. Well, I'm proud to say that this year we did step backs with each of our schools. We plan to do that with our different district departments. And we talked to principals and their teams. Some schools brought teams, and in the future, I think we'd really like to have teams be part of those conversations where they talked about successes that they've had so far, adjustments they needed to be made. We didn't expect that everybody was going to be greenlighting every initiative. There would be a variety of positive gains, but there'd also be places where schools were still stuck. And we asked schools to take their challenges and their areas of stuckness, if you will, to help think about then how they might use how that might inform their budget and their priorities for the upcoming school year. And so that was the catalyst and the catapult that we used to start the budget discussions for this year. And about where to reinvest, what trades they needed to be made, what additions they need to be made. It's not just about layering on more bodies. It's not about adding more dollars necessarily, because there is a finite number of dollars. It's about making some trade-offs around where your school is, where your school may need extra support, and shifting dollars into those places from areas that maybe you don't need the same support. And that can change from year to year. It can change within a school year. So we're trying to set the the routine and build the muscle that this is a iterative process of school improvement and resource allocation. This gives you a monthly look at this. You can see when school improvement plans and district improvement plans were developed. We had our step backs. They actually occurred in January. And we asked schools to iterate around what the data that they had in the mid-year. And then as you can see, we essentially launched planning for next year, for the upcoming school year in January. So for them to start planning for the changes that they needed to be made, how to best improve by reallocating people, time, technology, and dollars. And that is where your budget priorities begin to emerge. I just want to point out, this is far from perfect. Again, it's imperfect as a system. We're building that muscle. We need to refine this. We got to get better at it. It's got to be more transparent. We want to include more people in these conversations. And we also think we can be a lot more innovative and creative about how we use resources. Salem Public Schools does have, relative to a lot of other districts, a lot of resources in our schools. And it's something, and it's a luxury. I would say it's a necessity to have those resources, but how we use them, I think we need to continue to think differently about how we can use them to accelerate impact for the student experience. Because I think we can be doing better than what we have been doing given the resources that we allocate to our schools. Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to Assistant Superintendent Delai, who's going to take us through the budget context, give you a snapshot of what's happening relative to our funding for this upcoming school year.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Schreck. We start our conversations about budget and the budget process with kind of where we ground our conversations. And so these are our budget guidelines. I think it's fair to call them even more like budget agreements or budget commitments. Then as we go through the budget process, and it was very exciting this year to have that so connected to the school improvement and district improvement planning process, because during that process, we really got to identify what are the needs of our students, how do we prioritize those needs, and how do we make sure that the dollars that we allocate are aligned to those priorities. And so those are exactly the types of commitments that you see here, using data and evidence that was provided during those step backs to show exactly how are students doing using the metrics that we want to use, how are we as a district doing with the metrics, and being able to say wherever we are clearly needing more support, that's where we want to target those dollars. And we are more transparent about doing that by showing the data and telling the story of this is why we are asking for the resources that we're asking for. And this is what we hope to address through those investments, and to make sure that those investments are allocated equitably across the district, and to make sure that they're targeted towards the highest needs. We obviously want to invest our dollars in things that we know are effective in improving student outcomes and leading to student success, and also invest in the capacity of our staff so that they can meet the needs of an ever-evolving and diverse student population. And finally, make sure that we're investing appropriately in the conditions for successful learning. And that a lot of that has to do with our buildings and making sure that our buildings are not a hindrance to the teaching and learning environment, but actually help to elevate the teaching and learning environment. Some of the budget drivers that are driving the budget and things that we look at as factors that will help us understand what kind of dollars we may need in the next fiscal year include enrollment and demographic shifts. And enrollment in Salem is declining. It continues to decline. That is a trend that started about a decade ago. This past year, for the current year, October 1, we lost 176 students. However, we also saw some significant increases in certain populations of students, including low-income students and our multilingual learner students. And those shifts have an impact on resources and how we use resources. We need to fulfill our contractual obligations. We have settled contracts last year with our STU and our paras, our two of our larger unions. And so we know what those contractual obligations are. That increase alone to fund those contractual increases our budget by about 3.5% overall. We are continuing to need to address COVID-related challenges for students, whether they be learning challenges, social emotional challenges. That's still something that is part of what we need to invest money in. And we need to continue to invest in our buildings and making sure that any deferred maintenance, that we're able to address that deferred maintenance and to shift our response from more of a reactive to a proactive maintenance. We need to address any inequities that we see in funding across buildings, across programs. And as we've said a couple times now, very exciting that we feel like we're making some significant headway with making sure that our resource requests and are aligned to our strategic priorities, to our district improvement goals, and to our school improvement goals. One of the more significant drivers of our budget is obviously revenue. We have a $66.5 million budget here in FY22, and we know that that's going to increase at least 3.5% due to our contractual obligations. We know there are other needs out there. We've received through the budget process, we've received a lot of requests for additional resources that people feel that they need to be able to address some of these priorities. And funding is part of the equation. In terms of funding right now, and this chart shows you a couple things. The line, the bars, the blue bars that are hashed, the light blue bars, that is what's known as the foundation budget. That is the amount of money that the state says that we need to be able to provide an adequate education to students. That establishes what's known as Salem's required net school spending. That's that dashed line that's above the bar. So that's how much we have to spend. We historically, however, have spent a lot more than what the foundation budget allocates to us. And you can see that in the blue line. And you can see that that gap has been increasing over time as we invest more than what the foundation budget would say we would need to educate our children. We have diverse, complex, demographics of students. And so obviously more investments necessary to meet those needs. A lot of those additional dollars do come from federal and state grants, and that helps to lift us above just foundation. The orange bars I want to draw your attention to because that's our state aid, also known as Chapter 70 aid. That's how much money we get from the state each year. And you can see it sort of as a percentage of the foundation budget. And you can see that over the last 3 years, that number has really not moved. And in fact, for next year, the projection is that our state aid will only increase by 0.5%, actually just under 0.5%. We get about $25 million of funding in state aid. So that's a significant proportion of our $66 million budget. And the challenge here is that that Chapter 70 aid is starting to level off. And we're not seeing the increases. So we have a foundation budget that's increasing by 4.6%, but state aid is only increasing by 0.5%. So the difference has to be made up for by the city. And that's obviously that's a challenge. Go to the next slide. You may have heard about the Student Opportunity Act, and Salem, I think, was very excited that the Student Opportunity Act was likely to bring significant increases in revenue to Salem, because the whole point of the Student Opportunity Act was to allocate more dollars to specifically low-income students and our multilingual learner students. This analysis that you see here is analysis of all of the gateway districts. And what this is looking at is the percentage of our education, our foundation budget that is paid for by the state. And over the last 3 years, and I had said those bars looked like they were very level. In actuality, that our share of the amount that the state is paying for Salem has plummeted by 10%. So it used to be that we were getting about 40% of our foundation budget from the state. And for FY23, that proposal drops us at about 30%. And so that's significant. So even though we know we have a needy population, the Student Opportunity Act, plays out in the foundation budget, and it says, yes, Salem, you must spend more money on these children. Even though you have fewer children, you have more needy children. And unfortunately, though, you are too wealthy to receive any significant increase in the contribution from the state. So it's a complicated formula. I won't go into detail, but because of the perception of high property values and high median incomes, it sees us as being able to fund a lot larger share of our educational budget than what Salem really is able to afford. And I guess I'll let the superintendent comment on sort of efforts underway to help address that.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. The mayor is very concerned about this, and rightfully so. I mean, a lot of these conversations had started prior to the pandemic. Salem realized that it was not the formula wasn't working in our advantage, and then the pandemic hit. There was a change of superintendent. Last year there was no additional Student Opportunity Act funding. And then now we are back here planning for next year, and it's, rearing its ugly head in terms of the, where we're getting shortchanged. And we're the only gateway city that really is, even though many of the cities are declining in enrollment like ours, we're the only one that's really receiving minuscule amounts of funding. I think it's about $127,000, which is nothing when you think about salaries, and that's effectively 1.5 teachers. We need so much more as a community, and so the burden of the funding will fall on the increases have to fall on the city, which is not. We don't think that's just, given that the city of Salem serves such a needy population, both in terms of low income and high needs students. So it is something. There's a lot of advocacy happening right now, and we're hopeful that legislators will see this as a concern. But it's not just a concern for next fiscal year; it's what happens in the future as well. And as the burden shifts more and more on the city, and frankly, it's not like Salem is, while we do maybe have a little bit more means as a city than some of these other communities. I don't know if you just mentioned, I know you mentioned in the earlier presentation, Salem falls about like halfway in the middle, generally across the state, in terms of their revenues, I guess. Is that the right term, Mary, to say?
They're in terms of their property value on a per capita basis.
Yeah.
On a per capita basis, they're in the middle of the pack. But when you aggregate it, it makes us seem very wealthy. Right.
So stay tuned as we continue to advocate for this is obviously of grave concern to us.
And here, this pie chart shows you how the foundation budget allocates funding. So the foundation budget basically is based on per student rates. And so it looks at our enrollment across all these various categories. What is our enrollment in high school, middle school, elementary school? What is our Chapter 74 enrollment? And it allocates dollars based on that enrollment. So you can see that the majority of it is the students who are in our PK through 12 or K through 12. There's also a very small preschool piece. As we expand our preschool, that number hopefully will get larger. But you can also see that a significant amount of dollars come to us because of our percentage of low income students. And I think that's all I'd say about that.
I guess I can take this part, Mary. So just we added this from our last meeting because we realized we hadn't told people, what was coming up. And so we have an in-person forum Like I said, next week at Self-Install School from 6:30 to 8 o'clock. We have a series of finance subcommittee meetings, and I noticed that our trustee head of the finance committee is in the audience, Ms. Manning, and we're meeting next week on April 4th and April 6th to review the proposals made by schools, to review the input that we're getting at these sessions. We have an initial budget proposal to the school committee on Monday, April 25th. We will have a public budget hearing, which is required by law, on Monday, May 2nd. And then the final vote, if all goes according to plan, would be whatever adjustments and revisions are made by the committee by Monday, May 16th. And then eventually the city council will need to vote on the budget. And that's at a to be determined date, probably sometime in June or late May, early June, that will happen. So that just gives you a snapshot of what's upcoming. As we move into like the feedback portion of this conversation, last year we shared a series of budget priorities with the community. We asked them to weigh in and see whether, to help us prioritize, I should say, where sort of the order of importance. And in the end, we were actually, we recently did this assessment. We actually were able to fund quite a bit more than we anticipated last year. And you can see all the things in green are things that we've started. I'm not saying they're through completion or they're comprehensive as we would like, but a lot of work and investment, I should say, has gone into the areas in green. When I looked at it, I was a little surprised that it was so many of the items in the end that we were able to fund. Some of that was because we had support from ESSER, from grant funds, from COVID funds. We also did some reallocating to fund some of these of this work, but really pleased that these investments have been made. Some of these investments, public may not think are the right ones, and we want to hear that from people, whether they think, hey, yeah, press on, push forward, go deeper, or no, you know what, we don't think that this is necessary, and you probably should divert those funds somewhere else. We want to hear from you. The ones in blue, like hiring a full-time recruitment specialist, we weren't able to find somebody. We've just recently identified somebody, so that's partially invested in. Some of our work with our data systems, there's been partial investment. And then the items in red are things that we just have not gotten to. We have not invested in yet. We thought they were important. Maybe they're not anymore. And we also know there's a lot of things missing here that people have not, who we think people may weigh in now. We wanted to at least show you what we had put out there last year, what we thought we had already invested in, what we still had work to do, and then what are the things that we still had not yet allocated enough resources to. So this is an opportunity for folks to weigh in on some of these items. So moving on to the next slide. We're going to open up the floor first to questions, and then we want to have a discussion about the investment priorities. What should we continue doing or expand doing? Again, what should we just stop doing? It's not worth the investment. And then is there anything that we are missing or overlook or have overlooked in some of these investments? Like what else is missing? What are you seeing now that our kids are back after the pandemic? And that you want us to consider as part of the budget process. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I guess with the Q&A feature, if people want to ask any questions regarding any aspect of the presentation before we go to input, that would be great. If anybody has any questions of anything I shared or that Mr. Lai shared, please put those into the chat at this time. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, Mary, that as we're waiting if there's any Q questions.
No, okay. I don't think so.
Okay. I don't see any questions. Okay. I'm going to re-share. Let me just see. So I'm going to put up this slide here. And so we really want to know, like, what should we double down on? What should we stop doing? And what's missing? And we're going to record any responses we get. I wish we could be in person to have this conversation, but, and we will next week. I don't see any questions yet, or I don't see any comments yet from anybody. Chelsea, I don't think we can share, right, the document with them. Probably not in this.
No, if they want to put their emails in the chat, I'm happy, in the questions, I'm happy to send it to them,
Yep.
or a follow-up feedback form if they would feel more comfortable sharing offline. But at the moment, we don't have any way of messaging out.
Yep. Okay. You're all on the other side. Okay. I don't see any yet. We can exercise wait time, and that's fine. If nobody has any questions or input, that's fine.
Can I ask, or can I put forward one that might be helpful for upcoming budget presentations? There was a question in our earlier staff panel around school choice, that we had increased the access to school choice, and just a question had come up about what happened this year and how are our numbers. And so I just wonder if it's numbers that you have, you could offer those. Otherwise, it was just a curiosity that I couldn't answer.
Yes, we actually did very well this year in terms of school choice. We've seen some increasing school choice revenues coming in as a result of more students being choiced in. I think last year we might have been, $300,000, and this year over $400,000. So we are seeing those revenues, and we have had conversations about how we can utilize those resources in a sustainable way. It's hard to know, like, will those trends continue, but how can we use those resources that we have to help offset some of the needs that have emerged through these conversations?
Thank you, Mary. I wasn't able to answer that one myself, so appreciate it.
Yeah, if I wasn't sharing my screen, I could actually pull the numbers up, but there has been a significant increase in school choice, which has been, as Mary said, has been very helpful, will be very helpful to us in the future. And I think we're doing a better job of tracking down people who have had address changes and making sure that we're recouping funding for them. So yeah, that's definitely been, that is an exciting development, I would say, in terms of some additional revenue. I mean, and I think I shared in the last session, the number of births have declined since 2011 to 2021. There were 400 fewer births in 2021 than 2011. So, there's the birth rate has gone down significantly over the last 10 years. And then we also think in general that the school age, more and more families are not staying in Salem and moving out. So a lot of that has to do with housing costs. It's not just about students choosing to leave us, because the numbers have dropped significantly, not only in the Salem public schools, but in some of the charter numbers are down. The school choice out of Salem has dropped. And we've seen a decline in kids going to private schools as well in our annual report. So it just speaks to a decline in overall, children living in this city over the last, few years. And that, that's a factor for sure. But it certainly is not the only factor when we talk about the lack of funding that we received. Because as Mary said, there's a lot of communities, gateway cities, who have declining enrollment that are seeing a lot more resources come their way from a percentage standpoint than we are. So. All right, this is a group, not a very chatty group at all, but that I guess it comes with the territory, given that we're on the other side of the wall. I guess what I would encourage is if you could try to send people to come to our session next week, that would be great in person. We'll be able to have more of an exchange and a dialogue with people. We use this feature so we don't get infiltrated by Zoom bombers. We look forward to having an in-person conversation with folks next week on Tuesday from 6:30 to 8 at Saltonstall School. I don't know if there's anything else that people want to chime in on. Okay. Well, this went a little quicker than we thought. We're going to distribute this to our staff and families as well. And perhaps we'll be able to put the recording online for people to see as well. So we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us, making us a part of your evening. We appreciate that. And we will see you soon. Have a great night, everybody.